The Book of Zachariah, Part 2. Fast become feast in chapter 7, verse 1 through chapter 8, verse 23. These chapters present a carefully structured unity. The pattern for the whole is ABCD CBA, known as a chiasmus. In rhetoric, chiasmus, less commonly chiasm, to shape like the letter X, is a reversal of grammar. Chiasmus was particularly popular in the literature of the ancient world, including Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, where it was used to articulate the balance of order within the text. In its strict classical sense, however, the feature of chiasmus is to opposite grammatical shape or ideas of sentences, for the reason that the same phrases and are not repeated. For example, poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest and best minds. Zachariah chapter 7 verse 2. Now the people of Bethel had sent Sherezer and Rigamelech and their men to entreat the favor of the Lord. It is not clear who sent the men. Bethel, the town that was the center of worship for the northern kingdom of Israel, Darius or Sherezer. Verse 3. Saying to the priests of the house of the Lord of hosts and the prophets, should I weep and abstain in the 5th month, as I have done for so many years? Verse 4. Then the word of the Lord of hosts came to me. Verse 5. Say to all the people of the land and the priests, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th month and in the 7th, for these 70 years, was it for me that you fasted? The fast in the 5th month was July and August, marked the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 587 BC, when the temple was destroyed. The fast in the 7th month, September-October, commemorated the death of Gedaliah, the governor of Judah, after the fall of the city. We read about this in 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 25. But in the 7th month, Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the royal family, came with 10 men and struck down Gedaliah and put to death along the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. Zechariah chapter 7 and 8 asks some hard questions. They ask if they should continue to fast once they are in the temple. The answer, you fast to God. They ask, how should we govern ourselves? We read about this in chapter 7, verse 9 and 10. Thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgments, show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the sojourner, or the poor, and let none of you devise evil against another in your heart. When they got the temple finished, then they could go back to business as usual, and there would be prosperity coming into the land, and the nation would grow and become prosperous, and the tendency would be to fall into classes of people that would watch out for their own stuff. But Zachariah says, no, when you govern, watch out for those in need. They ask, what will happen to our nation? Chapter 8. Chapter 8 begins the story that ends all the way into chapter 14. And it says that the nation will be cared for by the living God. We read in 8:19, thus says the Lord of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, and the fast of the 5th, and the fast of the 7th, and the fast of the 10th, shall be to the house of Judah seasons of joy and gladness and cheerful feast. Therefore, love truth and peace. Chapter 9. Second Zechariah in chapters 9 through 14 reveals an entirely different spirit. There is no visions, no concern for the temple, no further hopes for Zerubbabel, and no Davidic restoration dreams. It is poetry instead of prose, and stresses God as a divine warrior who will fight to deliver Jerusalem from the power of foreign nations. It especially develops several themes found in his equal, especially those of God as a true shepherd of his people and the day of the Lord. Second, there's a sense of delayed coming of God in this passage. The hope that God will transform the whole world represents a new state of thought that developed in the centuries after Haggai and Zechariah. In the development of Israelite thought, they fall somewhere between the 6th century and the time of the book of Daniel and the 2nd century BC. Second Zechariah also continues many of the themes found in the original Zechariah, including the coming of a new age, the cleansing of all impurities from the Holy Land, the outpouring of the Spirit of Yahweh, and the place of Jerusalem as a center of God's restored land. Zechariah chapter 9 verses 1 through 8 pictures God's conquest. All Israel's old enemies fall before him. There will be no more oppression. Many relate these verses to the advance of Alexander the Great after his Greek army defeated the Persians in 333 BC. Zechariah 9, 5 through 7. Ashkelon shall see it, and be afraid, Gaza, too, and shall writhe in anguish. Ekron also, because its hopes are confounded. The king shall perish from Gaza, Ashkelon shall be uninhabited. Mixed people shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of Philistia. I will take away its blood from its mouth, and its abominations from between its teeth. It too shall be a remnant of our God. It shall be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron shall be like the Jebusites. The Philistines will be absorbed into Israel as the Jebusites, from whom David captured the city of Jerusalem, had been long before. The Philistines eat forbidden food and abhorrent to God's people. You can see this in Leviticus chapter 11. The Jewish captives will be released, and Israel's military power will equal 7 that of rising Greece. God is in his people's protection and salvation. We read in Zechariah 9, verse 9, Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Matthew later on quotes from the time of this triumphal entry. Centuries before it will happen, Zachariah pictures Messiah coming on the triumphal day on a donkey, pictures it right down to the detail. We read in Zechariah 9 verse 10, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he will speak peace to the nations. His rule shall be from sea to sea, and from river to the ends of the earth. This pictures the joyous arrival of the Messiah to claim the land. The New Testament Gospels quote Zechariah more than any other prophet in their narrative of Jesus' last days, reflecting on Jesus as the Messiah. Zechariah with Ezekiel also has a major influence on the book of Revelation. The two additional fasts were probably to mark the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem, the 10th month, and the breaching of the walls 18 months later, the 4th month. Chapter 10, verse 1, we read, Ask rain from the Lord in the season of the spring rain, from the Lord who makes the storm clouds, and he will give them showers of rain to everyone, the vegetation in the field. It is God, not pagan gods, who make the fields green and the earth a fertile place. Continuing chapter 10, verse 2. For the household gods utter nonsense, and the diviners see lies. They tell false dreams and give empty consolation. Therefore, the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. In the absence of any real spiritual lead, the people are dabbling in magic. The old household gods, teraphim, were used in divination. He will come to their rescue as a shepherd does, as we read in chapter 9, verse 16. Zechariah 10, chapter 10, verse 3. My anger is hot against the shepherds, and I will punish the leaders. For the Lord of hosts cares for his flock, the house of Judah, and will make them like his majestic steed in battle. Everyone will be brought home. Verse 3 returns to the victory theme, God at the head of the host, working miracles for his people. Chapter 11. The poem of verses 1 through 3 is an ironic lament for the fallen forest of Lebanon and Bashan. 11 verses 1 through 3. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour your cedars. Wail, O Cypress, for the cedar has fallen, for the glorious trees are ruined. Wail, oaks of Bashan, for the thick forest has been felled. The sound of the wail of the shepherds, for their glory is ruined. The sound of the roar of the lions, for the thicket of the Jordan is ruined. This is the clearance and preparation for the returning Israelites. Old Testament times, the thickets fringing the Jordan were the haunt of lions. Continuing in verse 4, Thus said the Lord my God, become shepherd of the flock doomed to slaughter. Verse 4 returns to the shepherd and flock images, the nation's leaders and its people. The prophet is sent to shepherd God's flock, but the people will not respond to the good shepherd, and he abandons them. He then becomes a worthless shepherd representing God's judgment and giving them up to bad leaders. Zachariah chapter 11:12, verse 12. Then I said to them, if it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out as my wages 30 pieces of silver. The prophet sarcastically calls it a lordly price. This was the price of a slave. Judas of the New Testament also received 30 shekels. Exodus 21 verse 32. If the ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. We read in Matthew 26 verse 15, and said, what will you give me if I deliver him over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. Matthew 27 verse 35, and when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. The overwhelming sense of compassion which leads to this mourning comes from God himself. Chapter 12, Zachariah 12 verse 10. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. They are filled with remorse for what they have done, and God cleanses them from their sins. John chapter 19 quotes Zachariah 12:10. We read in John 19:37, and again another scripture says, they'll look on him whom they have pierced. If we compare Zechariah 12:11 to Ezekiel 8:14, on that day the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Hadad Rimmon in the plain of Megiddo. Rimmon is both a place and name of a god in the Old Testament. The reference may be to the ritual weeping for the god at the dying of the year. We read in Ezekiel chapter 8:14, then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and behold, there sat woman weeping for Tammuz. Chapter 13, verses 2 through 6. And on that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will cut off the names of the idols from the land, so that they shall be remembered no more. And also I will remove from the land the prophets and the spirit of uncleanliness. And if anyone again prophesies, his father and mother who bore him will say to him, you shall not live, for you speak lies in the name of the Lord. And his father and mother who bore him shall pierce him through when he prophesies. On that day every prophet will be ashamed of his vision when he prophesies. He will not put on a hairy cloak in order to deceive. But he will say, I am no prophet. I am a worker of the soil, for a man sold me in my youth. And if anyone asks him, what are these wounds on your back? He shall say, the wounds I received in the house of my friends. This cleansing includes the removal of all false prophets. If any persist and prophesies, their own parents will turn against them and finish them off. The wounds are ritual gashes. Let's compare Zachariah chapter 13 verse 6 to 1 Kings 18 chapter 28. 1 Kings 18:28. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. Zachariah 13:7 through verse 9. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. I will turn my hand against the little ones. In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 shall be cut off and perish, and 1/3 shall be left alive. And I will put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver, and test them as gold is tested. They will call upon my name, and I will answer them. I will say, they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is my God. This short and surprising poem again picks up the shepherd image and the theme of leadership, which is so often in the prophet's mind. God summons the sword to strike shepherd and leader unidentified and scatter the people, the sheep. They are tested and purified until just a faithful few remain. With this remnant, the special relationship between God and his people will be renewed. Let's compare verse 9 to Zechariah chapter 8, verse 8. And I will bring them to dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God in faithfulness and righteousness. If we turn to Jeremiah, verses 31 through 34, we read, Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. Mark chapter 14, verse 27. And Jesus said to them, You will fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. If we turn to Hebrews chapter 8, verses 8 through 11. For he finds fault with them when he says, Behold, The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after these days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach, each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest. Turning to chapter 14. Chapter 14 pictures the final war of the nations against Jerusalem and its outcome, the day of God's judgment. God himself will appear with the angels, ushering in perpetual day. Zachariah 14:5. And you shall flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azel, and you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. Zachariah chapter 14, verse 8. On that day living waters shall flow out from Jerusalem, half of them to the eastern sea, and half of them to the western sea. It shall continue in summer as in winter. This idea of life-giving water flowing from Jerusalem echoes Ezekiel chapter 47. We read in Ezekiel 47:1, Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and behold, water was issuing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. The water was flowing down below the south end of the threshold of the temple, south of the altar. The whole earth will become God's kingdom, and all will worship him. Zachariah 14:19. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord will be one, and his name one. Those who set themselves against God, the city defended by his people, will meet a horrendous fate. All those who survive will join God's people in worship. Everything down to the humblest pot in the kitchen will be made over to God, cleansed and dedicated to his service. Zechariah chapter 14, verse 20. And on that day there will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, Holy to the Lord. And the pots in the house of the Lord shall be as the bowls before the altar. And every pot in Jerusalem and Judah shall be holy to the Lord of hosts, so that all who sacrifice may come and take of them and boil the meat of the sacrifice in them. And there shall no longer be a traitor in the house of the Lord of hosts on that day. Looking at chapter 14, verse 11. And it shall be inhabited, for there shall never again be a decree of utter destruction. Jerusalem shall dwell in security. And in verses 16 and 17, then everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Booths. And if any of the families of the earth do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, there will be no rain on them. There is a gathering of people when Jesus personally reigns. There will be a personal worship of Christ in Jerusalem. The New Testament book of Revelation, chapters 21 and 22, echoes many of the details in this great finale to the book of Zachariah. Motivation comes from being inspired. To accomplish something God's way and for His glory, His Spirit must be in control. God's plan will not be frustrated.